absolutely wild as Vern Gagne's All-Star Wrestling goes coast to coast and continent to continent. The greatest wrestlers in the world.
He may be an apprentice carpenter, but I guarantee you he is a seasoned ring veteran.
I've been hit with bar stools, bar rags, barmaids.
I'm talking to you.
They're scared that Hulkamania's still running wild. Oh, yeah. I got a big fat wife and 9 kids at home, and I gotta feed them.
And take a look at Jesse the Body in real life.
Open your hand once if you would.
You want to see it?
This is absolutely unbelievable. Totally, completely out of control.
He's coming in over the top. Hey! Look out!
Hello, everybody. Welcome into the preeminent podcast dedicated to telling the stories and reliving the memories of the American Wrestling Association. We like to call it AWA Unleashed. And we are preeminent and we are super professional guys because, well, you guys.
I was following you right until the whole professional line.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I was on the wrong podcast.
Exactly.
No. Here's how professional we are, right? Like we're getting everything set up, and frankly, I'm sitting at my kitchen table because I'm super lazy and I don't want to go back to other places that have done the podcast around the house. So I'm like looking, and I'm like, oh God, something looks off, and it's not just my face. Like my face is a whole nother issue, but like the lighting, it was like it looked weird. So while the open was rolling, I was sitting here like mixing and matching the lights. And after all of that, I realized that it didn't do me a damn bit of good. So I'm right back where I started. But nonetheless, I was running around for 55 seconds while that opening. But I mean, do my lights look better than what they did when we were kind of going through our pre-show meeting? Couldn't
be any better. I mean, absolutely. It's stunning. It's off the charts.
I'm a sexy boy.
Your question would assume that I paid attention when we were first on for the pregame prep.
Yeah. Well, now you know why we're so good, because Joe pays attention. I have bad lighting, and we have no idea what Mick's doing. But nonetheless, welcome to the show, guys. We filibustered 3 minutes. We're gonna have some fun today. If you don't like it, that's cool. If you like it, that's cool. But we're going to cruise on by the next, 2 minutes or so, because I've got the banners here and I'm going to put some information on, and we are going to talk about, before we get into the 1973, we got to do the promoting. So first of all, if you want to help us expand, we are on all sorts of platforms. YouTube, which is probably, that's where a lot of people enjoy watching us because it's a video watching platform. And what we do, we have a lot of visual aids. So we got the pictures, for a watch along, everything. Obviously, YouTube is the best place. But if you like the audio, we've got Spotify, we've got Google Music, if that's still a thing. We've got just iTunes. We got a whole bunch of different things. So check us out wherever you get your podcast. Also, do want to tell you that we do have our Patreon level. We do have a watch along coming up, along with a live chat. And I think for the live chat, we're going to tell you about something here in a minute that I think you guys are going to be really interested in. $4.99 a month, guys. I'm running a little behind on the letters and the magnets and everything, but I will get those out. $4.99 a month. You get our watch alongs. You get this a day early. You get our live chats. You get a 5-pack of pictures from Mick. Am I missing anything there, guys?
You are not. I encourage people. Yeah, get involved here. I'm down to my last 27,000 pictures. So I gotta get them out here.
I was gonna say
27,000.
Can I have like Bobby Heenan said? Can I have a hunchback mailman?
Well, I thought you were going to say 27 cents, and I'm like, that's 27 cents more than I've got.
Well, it's that's from our last 3 royalty. God. Anyway.
Also, hey, if you want it as well with tpublic.com, that's where we have all of our merchandise. So guys, if you want, just go ahead and check it out there. And yeah, the Patreon, we have fun with it, but you know what? We've got some fun things that are coming up.
Oh,
and before we get into 1973, guys, a couple weeks ago, we didn't get a chance to recap it during the Bischoff interview, but we were at MAW Grand Slam 6.
Yes, sir.
Well, Joe and I were there as fans, and Mick, you were working, but it was a fun night.
It was a great night, and man, did they deliver. I mean, not only, from the packed house, but the matches were great. The guests were cordial. It was a terrific night.
A great night for a great cause, raising money for the Native American Women's Shelter here in Minnesota. Always a good thing to help out people. So I agree with you. Matches were great. There's our AWA, part of our AWA Unleashed Army, I guess we're calling them, including Lenise Henning.
Yeah, that there we are in all our splendor and all our glory. And it was a great night. We got everybody together for the group picture. Good going on that one, Chris. Corralling everybody at intermission time. Good stuff. Fun times.
Yeah. And I don't think that I think there were a couple people that didn't make it, but I tried to get as many people as we could. And just great to have a bunch of the crew there. And it was a lot of fun. So I do want to thank everybody for coming out for the little meet. Maybe when the weather clears up again next spring, maybe we can do more of those. But I've got another one here, guys, that I do want to put up. And I think fans are going to see this. And this was kind of, remember the first time, to take it into the current era, when Eric Bischoff showed up on WWE television and hugged Vincent Kennedy McMahon?
I remember that when Booker T
And the
said,
shock.
Booker T said, "Tell me I just didn't see that."
Mhm.
Yeah, I remember, and this one-upped that.
Yes, it did. It was good to see our friend George Shire, and we had a chance to catch up. We all did, and we'll talk more about it. If you guys want to know, can't get into it here, but if you guys have questions about anything that we've done, we're gonna hit it up on our live chat coming up. I don't know. Next live chat, we'll talk about it. So there we go. Okay, so the year 1973. Mick, I know we were kind of going over some ideas, and this was kind of, people like the year in review. So we've done 75. We're going to go back a couple of years. First of all, how successful was 1973? Because there's a reason why we're talking about it. I mean, what were the hottest cities in terms of the tour and, in terms of the territory? And what about syndication? Like, how was the TV syndication at that time?
AWA was red hot. The early 1970s, the crowds weren't in the 19,000 range because they weren't, running the Civic Center on a continuing basis. They didn't have Hulk Hogan at the time, but the crowds were solid and the angles were red hot. I don't even want to say it was a transitional year in terms of the AWA itself, although there were some pretty big moments in 1973. But again, as I've said on previous podcasts, you look at the talent roster, and my God, the AWA, they were loaded. And as far as the hot cities are concerned, your typical AWA hot cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul was doing well. Chicago was off the charts. Milwaukee, Winnipeg, Omaha. I mean, it was really consistent. Sometimes they get into 5-digit attendances. For the most part, they were in the 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 range, which was really good back at the time. It was a very, very, very good year for the AWA.
Yeah, and to put the numbers into perspective, keep something in mind. The population was a lot different. I mean, there's more people in the cities 10 years later and subsequently 20 years later. Add in there the distribution of the wrestling, and then finally just the overall popularity of it. It just continued to grow. So if you were able to get 8,000-9,000 people, as you said, Mick, that was a hell of a house back in the day.
It absolutely was, and that basically was capacity at the Minneapolis auditorium. So that would have equaled a sellout. But it was AWA television all around the horn. Boy, their syndication was just on fire. So it's a good year to look back and see the history of the AWA.
Well, now in 1973, was the show still live, or was it recorded by that point and then distributed?
It was live in Minneapolis from 6 to 7:30. That was, the first live airing of the show, and then they would syndicate it around the country. Next couple of days, maybe next week it would turn up on Moline TV or Milwaukee TV or what have you. But in the Twin Cities area, the AWA hub, live TV from 6 until 7:30. Great stuff.
Fantastic days. Mick, you've talked about in the past that when the AWA went to Chicago, while it was certainly an AWA city, the AWA used different talent than a Milwaukee or a Minneapolis. Now, on occasion, was that because of just proximity? I mean, travel, more wrestlers were closer to Chicago, so why pay them the trans?
It's interesting. We're taking a look at November 1973 at the Chicago Amphitheater, which, by the way, was one of the most dangerous buildings that the AWA was featured in. History will bear that out.
Was that the one that Heenan, was that the one that Bobby got attacked in?
It was the one. Not only did he get attacked there with the claw hammer, but that was also the site of the shooting, where a fan opened fire from the balcony and aimed it at the wrestlers, but unfortunately hit some fans, and it bad news. But Chicago kind of did their own thing, and it was Bob Luce. They had a connection with Dick the Bruiser's WWA. You talk about in proximity, Joe, but you look at some of the names on this card. In addition to the AWA, you got Moose Cholak on the card. Pepper Gomez is on the card. Ken Dillinger, you see Ken Dillinger working against Greg Gagne on the show. Sailor Art Thomas would appear, periodically. Bobby Heenan was still big in Chicago in 1973. Remember, there was that time he was gone from the AWA for a while, and then he came back in 1974. So Chicago, again, a little variation on a theme, but still red hot all the time, every show.
Question for you on the on Bruiser's territory and Vern's, quick, Mick, before we get on.
Yeah.
Fair to say it was sort of a love-hate convenience relationship between the two organizations?
I don't know if it was so much a love-hate, Joe. The WWA and then Bob Luce in Chicago and then Vern and Wally here, they had a pretty good working relationship. They didn't. And again, you take a look at the lineup on that card and you could see it was intermixed. For Chicago, that was a pretty consistent thing. They had their AWA talent, but then they had Bruiser's talent coming in from the WWA, Indianapolis territory, and so on and so forth. So it was a good working relationship. Bruiser, as you know, came into the AWA itself, Minneapolis territory, periodically, not nearly as often as the Crusher did. And again, Wilbur Snyder was involved, and Wilbur Snyder was a great friend, one of Vern's great friends in the business. So everything was copacetic. It was good.
Okay, I was just sort of curious about that. Just running. Bruiser running his territory. I'll put it this way: it's always been difficult for two promoters to get along.
Yeah.
So that's why I brought it up.
Yeah, and I think if you look at history, Bruiser and Vern had a pretty continuous working relationship, AWA and WWA. So yeah, it was good. It was all good.
So you're talking about the 3 states that it was running. What about like internationally? I mean, did they add Japan to the 3 states, or like how did they work in Japan?
Well, you didn't. Yeah, I mean, you just gave a great geographical lesson there, Chris, because 3 states one of the states must be huge because it extended all the way over to Japan.
East Midwestern Dakota is show.
Oh my God, it's just massive land territory. They did run in Japan. The AWA did, at least, it wasn't a total AWA card, but AWA talent certainly appeared in Japan. And we're going to take a look there. That's from Nagoya, Japan, and this is September 1973.
You mean Nagoya, Japan, Illinois?
Illinois, yeah.
Illinois,
has to be. Set me straight there. Put me on.
I think it's right next to Schaumburg.
Put me on cruise control. You notice the AWA there, the champion Vern Gagne defeats strong Shozo Kobayashi in the main event, and that's 73. And Vern and Kobe had wrestled here in the AWA area in 1971. So it was that continuing working relationship. You'll see that Lars Anderson is on the card as I'm looking down. The great Kusatsu wrestled a lot in Omaha for the AWA. Dale Lewis worked early on in the 60s in the AWA. And then, of course, you got Greg Gagne on the show. You've got Moose Cholak. You got Bob Bruggers, Blackjack Mulligan. But yet this was a Japanese card. So it was an AWA tour, and they did extremely well. So that, again, 3 states plus Japan, I guess, is the AWA territory.
Well, you brought up the Vern Gagne being the champion in the AWA at the time. Let's take a look at the champions. Well, let me put it this way. We know Vern was a champion at the start of 1973. Anybody else get the belt, or did Vern hold it for the entire year?
Vern held it until Mr. Bockwinkel defeated him in 1975. So Vern had it pretty consistently. And back in the day, that's what champions did. It wasn't, this guy's held the title for 217 days and 7 hours. Vern held the title for years until he lost it to the Box. So Vern was champion going into 1973 on a singles level, had a lot of challengers that he turned back. But the old Vernsky, he was on top in the singles division in the AWA at the start of 1973.
How about the tag team champs?
This is very interesting because at the start of 1973, for 1 week, your champions were Vern Gagne and Billy Robinson. So Vern actually had both titles. There's Vern and Billy. Vern and Billy had won the championship from Nick Bockwinkel and Ray Stevens in December in the Twin Cities. Surprisingly enough, and I certainly enjoyed this, Nick and Ray won the championship back like a week later. So Vern and Billy came into 1973 as the tag team champs, but it lasted all of 7 or so days, and then it went on to Nick and Ray.
I find that rather interesting. Just like you talked about the AWA, the singles championship, where they would hold it for a long time, to only give somebody the straps for a week. I mean, what did Nick and Vern have a bet that Nick lost and said, okay, you got to drop the belts to me for a week? Or
no, first of all, it gives Vern the opportunity to say, I am a 2 championship holder here in the AWA. Vern and Billy had been feuding with Nick and Ray. And again, I talked about how hot the AWA was back at the time. Vern and Nick had their running feud going on at that time. And Billy Robinson was a key player and all of that with Nick and Ray. when Vern and Billy won the championship, I thought, okay, is Vern really going to have both of these titles? He's not wrestling a lot as it is. Vern had already started to slow down his schedule. So you give the guy 2 championships. What the hell? I mean, we ever going to see the guy? But, he goes down in history as a guy who held both the singles and the tag team championship in the AWA.
Did Nick and Ray hold it for the remainder of the year then?
Nick and Ray held it. Yes, they held it for quite some time. But then they lost it. And then, of course, Bobby Heenan shows up in fall of 1974 as their manager to set everything straight, get the road back on the straight and narrow, and led Nick and Ray to regaining the tag team championship. It was a great storyline, let me tell you.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, with Nick winning it in 1975, the singles championship, did he not then have the tag team and singles championship?
That's kind of what I was wondering, like doing the time in my head.
Without looking at the record books, I don't think Nick had a tag team championship when he won the title from Vern. I think he had already lost the title. I'm sure he did. I don't remember Nick ever holding both championships. But if you think about it, from 1972 on, Nick Bockwinkel was the champion in the AWA for probably, 14, 15 years, which is amazing.
Goodness gracious.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned kind of this ongoing feud. If there was one feud that you could say, because there always seems to be like one blood rivalry that seems to just like carry an entire year. Sometimes it's around a title, but usually I think like ones like these, they don't need the title. What would that one be? Like, what was the feud of the year, in your opinion, in 73?
No question about it. It was Wahoo McDaniel and superstar Billy Graham. Billy came into the AWA. Absolutely nobody had seen anything like it in terms of his charisma and showmanship. And he started the feud with Wahoo McDaniel. I was trying to think to myself, and there's one of their strap matches, and I'm telling you, they were brutal. Joe knows very well what Wahoo McDaniel is capable of. When he hits you with an open hand, and Superstar took that strap to the back, I'm telling you, it was like somebody swatting a fly at home. I mean, Wahoo made sure that he was crushed. I don't recall if Superstar was doing the kind of stereotypical taking shots at Native Americans back in the day, but I know that he and Wahoo just had this violent blood feud. And if you watch the original movie, The Wrestler, it basically starts out with a scene where Billy Graham is being interviewed on television, and he said, "Look what Wahoo McDaniel has done to me. I'm going to need stitches tonight." And I can't tell you how hot this was back in the day. And there was no blurring of the lines between babyface and heel. Wahoo was a hero. Superstar was a nasty son of a bitch. And they took it all around the horn in the AWA, both singles and tag team. But without a doubt, Chris, that was the feud of the year.
So I just want to ask, because, when you're talking about something that's that intense and, having the blood and all of that, what did this feud, was it different than, did others get to also like use the same amount of violence or blood, or was this one kind of allowed to go further to have it stand out, if that makes sense? Because today, today's wrestling, a lot of things seem to be the same, but was this one kind of allowed to be like, hey, whatever they're doing, nobody else do this? And I mean, I know you weren't like behind the scenes stuff. I know that's just from your guys' opinion.
Here's what I would say: the Crusher and Mad Dog Vachon had a blood feud.
Yes, that I agree from what I've seen.
Yeah, and Joe LeDuc and Mad Dog Vachon had a blood feud. But the one that really captivated the fans in the AWA, they had a focus on Wahoo McDaniel and Superstar Graham.
Okay.
And, you know, to the point, you did not need a championship match on the card to sell out the building. Wahoo and Superstar did that all around the circuit. It was incredible.
And oftentimes then, Chris, I should say more times than not, when blood became involved, it really meant something.
Yes.
It was sort of like the payoff. Crusher and Mad Dog in the cage. And of course, those two, I think they just love to bleed. That, you know, leading up the battles leading up to the cage, just it happened. But getting back to the Wahoo and Superstar Billy Graham match, if I'm not mistaken, that strap match happened on or very near to Easter Sunday.
Yes.
And years later, I'm a big fan of U2, and they came out with the song Sunday Bloody Sunday. When I first saw that title and heard that song, the first thing that I thought of was Wahoo and Superstar Billy Graham's Indian strap match.
You know, the AWA and pro wrestling in general, whether it was the NWA, whatever, never really paid attention to the holidays. You know, we'll bleed on Easter, we'll bleed on Christmas, we'll cut a guy's head off on Thanksgiving. It's all the same. Let's just put asses in the seats. And that's a great point, Joe. And the fact that it did mean something.
Yeah.
It was the blow off. It was two guys who detested each other. And damn it, this is when it's going to be settled.
Now, was that the end, or was that the end of Superstar Billy Graham being in the AWA?
No, he was here for a while longer, and he turned babyface. As a matter of fact, he turned babyface, and he let his hair go to its natural color. He hadn't shaved his head like he did in the karate Billy Graham era, which was useless.
Yeah.
But he shaved his head pretty close, you know, close cropped crew cut type, and let it go brown, and teamed up with some of his former enemies, including guys like Dusty Rhodes and what have you. So Superstar left the AWA as a babyface back in the 70s. When he came back in the 80s as a heel, it was just not the same guy.
I agree with the comeback, Superstar Billy Graham, not working for me. That the early years when he was a heel and he came out, he was, dare I say, the Muhammad Ali of the AWA with his poetry and rhymes. The early Superstar Billy Graham, phenomenal.
Let me just digress here a little bit, because I know we got a lot to get to. I remember a match with Mad Dog Vachon and Superstar Graham at the St. Paul Auditorium, the old auditorium. And Billy was a heel, and Mad Dog chased him back to the backstage area. And now all the fans are kind of following back to this action. And Billy Graham, if I recall, if you can imagine this, put himself in a phone booth. Remember those things? Phone booths? Put himself in a phone booth to protect himself from the mob and Mad Dog Vachon. This was, the dog probably could have chewed through the phone book, the glass and everything else, but it was extraordinary.
That's
red
fantastic.
hot stuff.
The sad thing about that is that the AWA wouldn't have recorded that.
That's right.
And if they did, if there was a camera there, like, fast forward to the 80s, typically we just had the one camera on the platform at the Civic Center. The fact that Superstar Billy Graham did that and it's not on camera, that would be classic.
Isn't that
but so classic. I mean, they don't even have phone booths anymore.
Yeah, they even had phone booths.
Yeah, it's something you'd see in a sitcom.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like today, where, we got something going on in the back. Let's put our camera back there. No, Superstar in the phone booth was not recorded for posterity.
That would have been so
sadly.
Good.
Yeah, phones for you, Mad Dog.
Absolutely love it. We've talked about some of the talent on the roster at that point. Let's talk about some of the other talent that weren't champions or battled against Wahoo in a strap match. How about that?
No, there he is with a rare smile and cigar lit and ready to go. Or maybe he's going to eat it. Crusher did that quite often as well. The Crusher, of course, was still in the mix in 1973. Red hot baby face. He did feud with superstar Billy Graham, as did Wahoo McDaniel. Crusher feuded with the Vachons back then. We talked about that. Feuded with Ivan Koloff. So back in 1973, Crusher was still at the top of his game. Didn't bump any more than he did in 1986. But Crusher again, filling buildings wherever he went. He was absolutely a mainstay. I love that picture. Love that picture of Crush with that smile.
And as we've discussed 100 times on this show, my all-time favorite.
Yeah.
But I do have to reiterate the worst finishing move in the AWA. The bolo punch. You knew it was coming. The windup was great, but as a finishing move, I think Hogan's leg drop might come a very close second, or maybe even a 1B.
All wind up and no pitch.
There
you go.
Very good. Let's get on to a tag team that was just phenomenal during the year of 1973. We're talking Dirty and Dusty.
Well, it's actually Dirty Dusty. Oh yeah, it was Dirty Dick, or better Dirty Dick than Dusty Dick, I guess. But, Rhodes and Murdoch, they were bona fide heels when they came in. We've talked about this many times. The old Flame Cafe in downtown Minneapolis on 14th and Nicollet. It's not there anymore, and I think Dusty and Dick probably are to blame for that. They would go over there after the matches and pretty much shut the place down, along with everybody that was in it, all the bar patrons. But don't let the smiles fool you. When Dusty and Dick, the Texas Outlaws, first came into the AWA, they were bona fide heels. They feuded with all the baby faces in the AWA. I've mentioned many times they had that match with Bockwinkel and Stevens, allegedly a match of 4 heels. Dusty and Dick actually got cheered in that one, and that turned into a full-scale riot at the Minneapolis Auditorium. Police officer got stabbed and so on and so forth. But Dusty Rhodes at that point was just coming into his own as a major player on the national scene. Charisma personified, and Dick Murdoch was Dick Murdoch. Yes, and if you knew him, you know exactly what I mean.
I'm just thinking back to Dusty's interviews, and in my mind, have we done a show on the best talkers of the AWA?
I don't think we have. I think we've talked about interviews, but I don't think we've talked about like the actual talent and the best interviewers or the best, interviewers.
Maybe a show idea. We can ask our fans to submit their top 5 list or whatever, and then we can throw in our own opinions. But when I think of Dusty, I mean, there's so many different things, but damn, he was so good when he had a mic in front of him.
Oh, one of the best ever. And again, here's another guy, Dusty Rhodes. When he left the AWA, he had turned babyface.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I don't remember Dusty ever being a heel. Like I got the American Dream NWA Dusty Rhodes. Like that's the first one. How did Dusty's promos differ from him being a heel to a babyface?
What I would say is this, Chris. I think Dusty was amplified as a babyface. He amplified the Dusty Rhodes character. Sometimes his promos as a heel were on the dark side, and pretty savage, and pretty gruesome in detail. He was not, the son of the plumber, and
Okay,
he was
that's
not.
what I was going to ask.
Yeah.
It was the American dream. It was the the son of a plumber, doing all the,
Oh
back
yeah,
of the
every
King's
man,
Speech,
and
stuff like
hard
that.
times and what have you.
Yeah.
No, Dusty
Okay.
was a rock solid heel.
Okay.
Yeah, and Murdoch wasn't too bad on the mic either, but he was no Dusty.
Dick Murdoch, at one time interview in St. Louis, he's cutting a promo on TV, and the fans are yelling at him, and Dick Murdoch turns around and says, "Shut up, you bunch of kayfabers."
We could use that today.
Oh, great.
Let's move on to our next one. A couple of Ks here. We've got a Koloff and a Kowalski.
Two of my favorite guys in the business ever, Stan Kowalski and Ivan Koloff, the Russian Bear. And Stan, of course, from Minneapolis, but he was always aligning himself with a foreign heel. He did it with Kobayashi out of Japan in 1970, 71. And then in 1972 and beyond, he did it with Ivan Koloff. It was a match made in heaven. Stan was starting to wind down his career as a wrestler, but he still would get into the ring occasionally to mix it up, other than his managerial role. Ivan Koloff had come off that tremendous upset over Bruno Sammartino out at Madison Square Garden. Bruno, I believe, was 8 years on. He had not been beaten. And Ivan came into town with a great reputation. He didn't say a lot on television. It wasn't the Ivan Koloff of the NWA in the 1980s and 90s. Stan was the mouthpiece, and I'm telling you, the heat that they got was absolutely tremendous, especially when it came to Vern Gagne. Stan, of course, had this inner dislike for Vern, so his interviews kind of bordered on that shoot. But it was great stuff. And again, outside the ring, you couldn't find nicer guys than Stan and Ivan.
Loved working with Stan. Didn't have nearly as much interaction as you did, but just a nice guy. I mean, I know that's used very often, but that summarizes Stan Kowalski.
Very much so. Very much.
So let's stay on the whole foreigner theme here. And back in 1973, as a proud 100% poll, these two guys were I despised, my most hated wrestlers at this time.
Horst Hoffman on the left and our friend George Clooney, Baron von Raschke on the right. Baron was certainly the more animated talker of the team. Horst Hoffman kind of had an understated, evil, sinister heel persona about him. Baron allegedly taught Horst the claw, which you can see. You just kind of bend your hand and you've been taught the claw. But when a horse delivered it, it obviously didn't have the same impact as it did with the Baron. Horst Hoffman was a huge star in Europe, and a lot of times in the AWA, he would wrestle what they called European-style matches, like the round system, when he would go against a Jeff Ports or a Billy Robinson or what have you. So from a technical standpoint, Horst was excellent. But you said it, Joe, the foreign heels, they hated Germans, wrestling fans, still fighting the war all those years later, but they were over huge as a tag team. I don't know if Horst Hoffman is still with us. If he is, he's got to be, 90 years old or better. But they were great. They were top notch.
I got a question about the whole European system that they used.
Yeah.
Was it a round system like boxing where each round, you'd have a referee assigning points?
It was along those lines, and sad to say, it was the impetus for the American Wrestling Federation round system, which I was involved in back in the 90s. But they didn't build the whole promotion around it. It was a special match, like a cage match or a coal mine this glove match or what have you, but with European rules, so they could showcase what Horst Hoffman could do.
Okay, when you first stated it, the first thing that popped into my head was the Team Challenge series. Sorry.
Ooh.
Yeah. Oh, hey, we've gotten a couple of dual shots in here. Let's move on to our next one. A couple of guys that I know you were really fond of back in the days, Mick. We're talking about Buddy Wolf and Larry Heineme.
Buddy Wolf, Larry Heineme, Lars Anderson, whatever you want to call him, from St. Cloud State University. I don't know if we're going to have the picture ready to go or not. They also had a feud with Wahoo McDaniel, and they took it up a notch. They would wear the T-shirts that would say, "Squahoo is a loser." And there you see that's Buddy Wolf, the late Buddy Wolf on the left, and Larry Heineme, Lars Anderson on the right. It's interesting. Heineme changed his name to Lars Anderson. Then he went back to Larry Heineme. He would profess his disdain for the Swedes and Norwegians up here in the state of Minnesota. They were both great collegiate wrestlers, but again, super heels. Larry Heineme broke into the business as a milquetoast babyface trained by Vern Gagne. Beautiful Buddy Wolf wound up being a babyface in the AWA years later after his match with Muhammad Ali on Wide World of Sports. But they had feuds again with the baby faces of the day in singles and tag team matches, and they were great. One of my all-time favorite tag teams. And again, look at the frickin' roster the AWA had back in 1973.
Well, and we've just scratched the surface. You go on to the next guy, and I remember him as a tag team champion with Hercules Cortez. Of course, I'm talking about Red Bastien, a guy who, to me, in my life, he was the first high flyer. He was a high flyer before the high flyers were.
Red Bastien and his tag team partner, Billy Red Lyons, in the 1960s here in the AWA, and then Red and Hercules defeated the Vachon brothers to win the tag team championship as the next decade rolled around. And then, of course, sadly, Hercules Cortez, July 24, 1971, was killed in an automobile accident coming back from Winnipeg. Red was a passenger in the car, but he survived with minor injuries. Went on to team up with the Crusher here in the AWA area as a tag team champion. And Red was such a smooth wrestler. And being billed out of Minneapolis, he had that hometown AWA feel to him. Can't say enough good things about Red Bastien. Feuded with Bockwinkel and Stevens and Ivan Koloff and, Dusty and Murdoch and all the heels of the day. One of the great wrestlers in the history of the business. And again, here he is on the AWA roster. It's 1973.
And of course, we got to throw in one hell of a nice guy.
Oh, it's just a wonderful guy. Cauliflower Alley Club has the Red Bastien Friendship Award, named after Red, and deservedly so.
Our next guy, admittedly, I really don't remember. I know of him, but I don't remember him wrestling because I don't think he ever got put as a main eventer. Talking about Jeff Ports.
Jeff Ports from England, and he actually did have a run as a main eventer. He was here for a couple of years, but he teamed up with Billy Robinson pretty consistently, and they had a feud with Bockwinkel and Stevens back in the early 1970s in the AWA. Jeff was another one of those guys that wrestled Horst Hoffman in European-style matches around the Horn. Great technical wrestler. His son, Scott McGee, was a professional wrestler down in the southeastern part of the United States. Ports was another one of these guys, very technically sound. He didn't have the impact, certainly, that Billy Robinson did, but he was a rock-solid wrestler, and he eventually turned heel in professional wrestling, not here in the AWA. But Jeff Ports was a mainstay for a couple of years here, right on top in 73.
I wish I could rewind back and to that year, but alas, here we are. Next guy, we all know. We've talked about this legend, Larry the Axe Hennig, and I gotta say, was that after a meal at Murray's Steakhouse? Larry was a big boy.
Larry, I think Larry weighed 297 at birth. And then they always billed Larry at about 290. Come on.
Yeah, he was well
yeah.
over 3 bills.
Oh, you and I know Larry quite well, and of course, without the axe beard there, Larry's head looks a little bit more oval than when he had the beard. But Larry back then, this is 1973, mind you. He has not turned babyface yet, and he wouldn't turn babyface until the fall of 1974. He was always in the mix as a heel, and there are not too many guys that were as good a heel and could cut as good a promo as Larry Hennig. And, you know, whether he was Pretty Boy Larry Hennig back in the day or Larry the Axe Hennig, even called himself the Desert Fox. At one point, he had gone out to wrestle out west in the Arizona area. He came back and he said, just call me the Desert Fox. And Larry's one of these guys in and out of the AWA territory. And every time he came back, he would say, the axe is back and the axe is back to stay. Well, what, Larry, for a week before he left again? But tremendous heel. We've talked about Larry Hennig's Hall of Fame career and certainly Mount Rushmore in the AWA.
Agreed.
Yep.
Next guy is, shall we say, magnificent. We're talking about the magnificent Don Morocco.
You know, we're going to take a look at Don here, and that is early Don Morocco. And I don't think he had transitioned yet to the magnificent heel that he turned out to be, one of the great heels in wrestling. In 1973, he had come into the AWA, I want to say 71 or 72. He was still here in 1973. He was a babyface, rock solid babyface. He would team up with Red Bastien on occasion, always involved in the mix with the Ivan Koloffs of the world and that type of wrestler. He was so over as a babyface. And of course, early on here in the AWA in 1972, he teamed up with Jimmy Snuka, who was wrestling here as Lonnie K. Aloha back in 1971. And Jimmy left the territory. Don stuck around. And eventually, to me, there's no comparison. The heel Don Morocco, one of the greatest of all time. He was a good babyface, tremendous heel.
He was a big boy in that photo as far as muscles, but he got even bigger, thicker, shall we say.
Yeah.
So the next guy, I certainly remember him more talking on the mic than wrestling in the ring. I'm talking about the Lord, James Blears.
Look at that. Look at that. Yes, ladies and
looks like George Godasky, sort of, doesn't he?
He certainly does. That is Lord James's hair had not turned white yet. I believe that happened right as he entered the ring for the Hogan Bockwinkel match, or certainly right after. But he was a good friend of Nick Bockwinkel's. Lord James Blears out of Hawaii came into the AWA in 1973, and you know he and Nick were kind of playing off each other. You know, they were great friends, but on television they had this feud. Lord James Blears had one of the most beautiful daughters ever. If you ever get a chance to see a picture of Laura Blears, his daughter, she was a champion surfer. And man, knockout. I think she was in Sports Illustrated, as a matter of fact. But Lord James, not a lot of success in the AWA as a wrestler. He was kind of a mid-card guy. As I'm looking over the results, he won some, he lost some, but never really made a main event splash. But 1973, he was consistently on shows around the horn.
our next guy.
So I get one question about Blears. So if he was just kind of a mid-card guy and didn't really stand out, why did he play such a big part in the whole Hogan Bockwinkel fiasco?
You would periodically hear about Blears and guys like Ed Francis, Billy Francis, Russ Francis, guys from Hawaii. Vern and the AWA would always make reference, especially to Blears. They just kind of kept his name out there. And he was one of these guys. He was kind of like this troubleshooting referee.
Mm-hmm.
You could be Joe Blow, and the AWA could give you the name of a troubleshooting referee, and all of a sudden everybody's, oh shit, oh now we're going to get Law and Order. I don't care who, but Lord, and again, you got to remember this is 10 years later. Chris, he's involved in the
Well, it just doesn't make any sense when you've got somebody who had average success, and then you're bringing him back. You're like, well, I mean, can I really? And maybe, fans didn't have that memory. Maybe I'm looking at it hindsight 2020, but I guess that's, you're telling me he just kind of had mid success, and it's like, well, then you brought somebody who was just kind of back to be part of that whole thing. But I mean, I guess you say troubleshooting referee, and all of a sudden people are like, well, this guy's a badass.
Think of it this way, Chris. It's sort of like a shiny new object that you just get.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Him not being regular like a Marty O'Neill or a Jim Mitchell or, the regular referees of the time, you attach troubleshooting referee from Hawaii, Lord James Blears. Well, people bought it. So it was all about the sell of Lord James Blears rather than what he actually did.
And Joe Blanchard, Tully's dad, they would bring him in as a troubleshooting referee. He really had no AWA connection to speak of. Our friend Merv Unger up in Winnipeg, Canada, Merv, great guy, but all of a sudden he came in as a troubleshooting referee. Al DeRusha somehow got, credentials as a troubleshooting referee. So, but in title, it meant something, but I understand where you're coming from.
Let's pitch that to MAW for next year. One of you two becomes a troubleshooting referee.
Could be you. You're getting involved a little bit in the MAW.
We'll talk about that later.
Let's move on. Let's move on to our next guy, Sergeant Jacques-René Pepe Le Pew Goulet. Does that cover all of it? But of course, in 1973, he was René Goulet.
He was René Goulet, and he had actually been in and out of the AWA since 1963. So he already had his sea legs under him. When he was here early on in the 60s, he feuded with the Crusher. He was the babyface. In the 1970s, now you got a heel René Goulet. He wasn't Sergeant Jacques quite yet. That was a couple of years down the road. But as René Goulet, and of course, he wasn't Pepe Le Pew yet until he got involved in that, situation with that other guy. But René Goulet, I've always said René Goulet was underrated and so underestimated. He was a ring general. He knew the psychology as a heel. He played to the fans just great. So if you didn't see René Goulet as a heel in his prime, you were missing something. Not a long stint in the AWA in 1973, but enough where if you go back and look at the results, you see an awful lot of René Goulet.
When I first saw this picture, the first thing that popped into my mind is that Stone Cold Steve Austin's father? I mean, there's some similarities there of an earlier Stone Cold when he's still
stunning Steve.
Stunning René.
Stunning René didn't quite work. He was actually he's in the Hall of Fame in Waterloo. The late René Goulet, Bob Bredard, out of Canada, by way of Nice, France. He
French Foreign Legion.
You know how that goes. But René Goulet, again, so vastly underrated in the business.
Some people have 3 states. Apparently, they've got 3 countries.
Minimum. That's in a bad week. Yeah.
Let's move on. We've got our next guy who, again, sort of like a Jeff Ports. I don't really remember very much, but have heard the name many times coming out of Vern's mouth. And we're talking about Bob Bruggers.
Interesting story about Bob Bruggers. He was a standout high school basketball player at Danube High School in Minnesota. I believe they might have been state champions when Bob was going to school there. He's a Vern Gagne trainee. Here in the AWA area, he just did not progress very far. He was kind of like an Evan Johnson. He just, certainly a step above Laurent Soucy, but Bob Bruggers left the AWA fairly quickly. He got his training underneath him by Vern. Then he went south, went to Florida, became a big-time star there. And Bob Bruggers was one of the guys on the plane that crashed with Ric Flair on board. Bob happened to be on that flight. And he passed away a couple of years ago at the age of 80. Stellar athlete, milquetoast babyface here in the AWA. But again, we're kind of looking at the whole roster there, top to bottom. And Bob Bruggers became a regular. But again, like Ric Flair, he was here and gone.
I see on our list, I skipped a couple, and we got to go back and get them. I believe we talked about him with Eric Bischoff, and the wrestler I'm referring to is Cowboy Bill Watts.
Bill Watts, the Cowboy, legendary in professional wrestling, both as a wrestler and then, of course, as a promoter and owner. Bill Watts was a no-nonsense guy. When he came to the AWA, he was a babyface. He had wrestled babyface and then turned heel, excuse me, in the WWF, Madison Square Garden days. Comes to the AWA as a babyface, and he was over like a son of a bitch. Old school guy, Eric Bischoff mentioned this. Vern loved him because he was an old school guy. Big, tough Cowboy Bill Watts, probably 6'4", 6'5", around the 300-pound mark. Massively over as a babyface here in the AWA, got into the mix, teamed up with Wahoo McDaniel, of all things. So you had that old Cowboys and Indians thing going. And back in the day,
I was going to ask how the whole Cowboys and Indians thing would have been perceived by the fans. Like, was it? Oh, I mean, you said
it was over huge.
Okay,
it was over huge. It wasn't a PC era by any means.
Yeah,
and when you got the Cowboy and the Indian teaming up together, it was magic. And matter of fact, I believe they defeated Bockwinkel and Stevens a couple of times in non-title matches. Can't overemphasize the importance of Bill Watts, not only AWA, but the whole wrestling industry. He did things his own way. And Bill is still with us. I think he's in his mid to late 80s, and tough guy.
What was Watts's territory?
Watts had the Mid-South territory, and he had the UWF, the Universal Wrestling Federation.
Before Herb Abrams.
Oh, yeah. When it meant something. But Watts's territory, you can't say enough good things about that territory. The talent that he had, from the Freebirds to Hacksaw Jim Duggan to Crusher Khrushchev, your friend Barry Darso. Bill Watts is a legend in this business. And
didn't he have like DiBiase and Junkyard Dog and,
absolutely,
and Jake Roberts and all of that too?
He had them all. And, when he went to the NWA, when he went down to Georgia, he kind of shook things up a little bit, did things his own way, much to the chagrin of wrestling fans and wrestlers alike.
That was not a good era in WCW, let me say that.
No. And here in the AWA as a babyface, he actually had matches against Vern for the championship in the late 1960s. And
did Bill Watts ever have any influence with the book here?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
But he was certainly on top to the point where Vern would, when he would wrestle Watts, Vern was the subtle heel, as he was when he would wrestle Billy Robinson. Bill Watts again over huge as a babyface, and he made an impact in the AWA.
Yep.
Next guy on our list, I have to admit, I said a couple of guys prior that I don't remember that well, but I'd heard of them. This guy, I don't recall whatsoever. George Scott.
George Scott. Again, he was a mid-card guy in the AWA. George, in some circles, kind of resembled Nick Bockwinkel in terms of his demeanor and his overall appearance. He was a babyface. Came in, did not make a big splash in the AWA. Wrestled on the undercard. I don't remember George main eventing any shows, but he was here for a pretty lengthy stay. George, when he went down to Georgia Championship Wrestling and that part of the country, he was one of the bookers down there. And so he became a big deal in professional wrestling. He and his brother Sandy Scott were a great tag team. George, I hear good things about it and always heard good things about. But here in the AWA, he was a consistent talent, name always on the shows, 1973, but didn't have the main event impact.
The next guy on our list did have main event impact, and I certainly remember him. None other than the Olympic strongman, Ken Patera.
Kenny Patera, our good buddy. And one of these days we're going to scrape up the guts and we'll have Ken on the show here. Might put Marty Jannetty to shame. But there's Ken right out of the 1972 Olympics, and he was a big MFer. Big, strong guy. First guy, to my knowledge, in Olympic history to press 500 pounds over his head. Came into the AWA as another Vern Gagne trainee. He came in about the same time as Chris Taylor did. Ken was Ken. He would wrestle Nick Bockwinkel. He had some championship matches around the horn, and it was typically doing the strongman stuff, where the heels would bounce off of Ken if they tried to shoulder tackle him. He had a feud with Superstar Graham in a weightlifting contest, where Ken is about to press more weight over his head with Superstar Graham in proximity. Not a good idea because, of course, Billy attacked Ken as he had the weights overhead. Some would say that they were gimmicked weights. I wouldn't say that, especially around Ken Patera. But Ken and Superstar Graham had a great feud, and Ken Patera, legendary. Not too many guys evolved into better heels than Ken Patera, pure and simple. Here in the AWA, babyface early on, came back, of course, later on as part of the Sheik's army. Lawrence of Arabia, which was, I believe, a rib on Ken Patera. He hated the name. But Ken is Ken. There's nobody like him.
Well, we've just introduced, shouldn't say introduced, because 51 years ago, we've just discussed a couple of rookies from 73. The next two did all right for themselves in the business. They were in camp at the same time. Well, I guess they were all in camp together at the same time. Look at the mustachioed Greg Gagne on the left, and shall we just say a slightly larger Ric Flair on the right.
This is such a great picture because, as you said, Joe, Rick and Greg came out of Vern Gagne's training camp together, and they wrestled a lot against each other around the horn as they were getting their feet wet in the AWA. Usually Greg went over. Sometimes they would, go to a time limit draw, what have you. I don't think Rick defeated Greg at any point early on. Imagine that. But yeah, that's the mustachioed Greg Gagne and the nearly 300-pound Nature Boy. I don't think he was Nature Boy. He might have been Grand Canyon Ric Flair at that point. But again, 1973, these guys got their start. And of course, Flair left pretty quickly and went on to much greener pastures for him in the AWA.
And our last look back at a couple of rookies. You had talked about Chris Taylor earlier, an Olympian along with Ken Patera. Here he is with the early Iron Sheik, Kaz Rovesiri.
What a picture that is. And look how big Chris Taylor is. I mean, Kaz wasn't the heaviest guy in the world, but he was tall, he was lanky, but Taylor was about 6'4" and every bit of 350, 375 pounds, maybe even more than that. But Kaz Rovesiri and Chris Taylor, again, two rookies that Vern brought into the business approximately at the same time. Needless to say, Kaz Rovesiri, the Iron Sheik, look at that chauffeur's cap. What a debonair guy, huh?
Iran and the United States can get along.
Yeah. There's proof positive right there. We can't overstate either's credentials as amateur wrestlers. Chris Taylor, of course, came into the business with great fanfare. Unfortunately for Chris, his size got the better of him in terms of physical health. He suffered from phlebitis and ultimately lost a lot of weight and passed away at a very young age. And Kaz Rovesiri, the Iron Sheik, man, that rock hard set of six-pack abs of his tended to protrude a little bit later on in his career to the point where he had a navel that looked like you could probably do a moon landing. But two great wrestlers, and they were both baby faces at the time here in the AWA. 1973. What a great year.
Hell of a roster. But I got to ask you this, Mick. I mean, we've done a few other years, and we've got more that we will be doing. Where would you rank 1973 on the list of, well, I guess over the 31 years that the AWA existed? Where would you put the year of 1973?
In terms of intensity, Joe, and in terms of storylines, right up there. There were not a lot of championship changes going on back then. I would say in terms of impact, in terms of, like I said, title changes, not so much. In terms of the overall feuds that were going on, it was incredible. And it was the kayfabe era in the AWA from Minneapolis to Chicago to Winnipeg. And when you talk about heat in the building, the fans didn't want to become part of the show and hold up signs back then. They were invested in the characters. They were passionate about the characters. So in terms of heat and intensity, 1973 was one hell of a year.
Will we ever get back to that? Or have we just gotten to the point where fans just want to be involved?
Never get back to it.
Okay.
No.
Right.
I used to think that on the independent level, Chris, maybe there was a chance where things weren't quite so scripted and choreographed as they are on the big stage. But even those, in a lot of cases have become spot fest, jumping off balconies and, going through tables and all that shit. And nobody believes it anymore. People may get caught up in the moment or the fact that they're on television. It's more like programmed cheap at this point. I'm supposed to cheer here. I'm supposed to boo. I'm supposed to yell, "You fucked up," or whatever, or "Holy shit," whatever it might be. The believability is gone.
But I think I think that's part of the problem with it, that we don't look at it as we are watching a fight. We're watching something. We want to be part of the show. And everything just kind of runs together at a certain level. Like no products stand out because it all seems to be presented the same thing.
Oh, it is.
I feel like you could really differentiate yourself if you were able to blur that line again, and you were able to create that separation at the same time, that emotional connection. I just don't know what it would take.
I honestly, I always hoped for that. I always hoped that maybe the business could recycle. Even back in the late 80s, early 90s, NWA would come on, We Wrestle. And when Vince was coming into the Twin Cities area in the 80s, AWA would come on, and the Major League of Professional Wrestling. We're not showbiz. We're not glitz. We're not glamour. I think the train has left the station. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube.
We're so far gone, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's there's no believability anymore. It's sports entertainment. The fans are part of the show. They think they're in on the joke, and that's where you're at.
Well, I'll use this analogy. Okay, I mean, yes, I agree that era of wrestling was better, but admittedly, I was also 8 years old in 1973, so it's a different perspective. But my analogy is this: you can still go and drive a 1973 car. You can't go and buy a brand new one. It'd be a used one. But do you really want to have just AM radio? Do you still want to have two keys for your car, one for the ignition, one to get into your car and trunk? Do you still want to hand crank your windows down? Do you still want to have only rear wheel drive? Times change, things evolve, for better or for worse, but it is the reality. We're never going to have 49 cents a gallon gasoline again. Heck, that might even be expensive for 1973. Times change, things change, for better or for worse. I'm just thankful that I was able to see 1973.
There you go. Well said, buddy.
All right. Well, you guys remember it. I was nary even a twinkle in my daddy's eye at that point. But I do have one last thing I want to bring up to you guys. And this has been a point of contention for quite a while. And Mick, I know that these are a couple of pictures that you have brought up that you wish to share with Joe to settle a little controversy.
Should I be nervous?
No. It's not those pictures.
Oh, good.
No, not those.
Those are. I thought I sent you the $5 for that.
Well, you did. They're still under lock and key. This is the point that I want to make to you, Chupik. You have always been a defender. You've always been a defender of Vern Gagne. You and I have gone back and forth on whether Bockwinkel's sleeper hold was a choke, and you always maintained that Vern's was on the chin, and thus it was a legal hold. Here's Vern against Billy Robinson. Now I want you to tell me, Chupik. I don't see the best, and I know you don't. You got the glasses going there. That forearm is underneath the chin. As a matter of fact, Billy is spewing saliva there, I believe. He's completely red-faced. The man is choking to death. And all those years that Nick would come out and say, Vern Gagne's sleeper is a chokehold. Mine is legitimate, the Singapore Oriental sleeper. Now let's look at it again. That's our friend Buddy Wolf. Tell me, Chupik, where is Vern Gagne's forearm? I'm seeing Buddy Wolf's chin clear as a bell.
Here's my question to you, Mick. So these are both still frames, a literal 1/30th of a second of real life live action. You're showing 1/30th of a second. I'm pretty damn sure that it sort of slid over and went on to the carotid artery. You've got a guy who is battling, trying to get out of it. It sort of slips and moves a little bit.
A good point, Chupik. If you want to go into fantasy land, the flip side of that is that perhaps the forearm started on the chin and then miraculously went underneath into the Adam's apple area. Personally, and again, Bockwinkel was to me a stalwart guy of integrity. He would never lie. He would never fabricate. He would never exaggerate. if Nick Bockwinkel, the greatest of all time, said that Vern Gagne's sleeper hold was a joke, and he had been in it many, many times, Joe. Come on. He was right there. He experienced it.
So,
and you're going to defend that guy.
Nick Bockwinkel was a heel, and Vern Gagne was a baby face. So you're believing the bad guy? Mick, I'm appalled.
Well, you're more than that. And I would say, in whose eyes was Bockwinkel a heel? Not mine, buddy. But anyway, I think the proof is in the pudding right there. And Chris, God bless you. You've remained impartial. But I think, there's the photograph. There it is right there. It's like a picture of a guy with time. No, it's like a picture of a guy with a tampon on his ear. There's your photographic evidence right there. Choke hold. Choke hold. There you go.
Okay.
All right. Let's
we settled that one.
Well, not so much, but let's move on. Let's get our shout outs.
Shout outs. Oh my God, Mick.
Oh my God.
Fuck. Jeez. Damn, Mick.
Hey, Nick's not here to defend himself anymore.
No,
I gotta, pick up the slack here.
Stand up
my shout out.
You are standing up for your guy. I mean,
damn right. Heel my ass.
Well, yeah. The whole thing. Well, in whose eyes was he a heel? That's very good. All right, let's get our shout outs.
Derek Stark. What a guy. What a tremendously loyal fan to the podcast. Always has great words for me and all of us. Great AWA fan. You deserve the shout out, Derek, and hats off to you, buddy.
My shout out goes to prove that, bridges can be rebuilt and crossed, and peace and harmony can exist. Mm-hmm. My shout out goes to the authority, George Shire.
Okay. And mine is going to go to Marty Kurth. Marty is a recent member of our Patreon, and I'm going to get caught up with some of the things for Marty, but he's been asking questions about topic ideas and show ideas and whatnot. And again, if you want to be like Marty and give yourself an opportunity for a
Marty Kurth, not Janetti.
No, not Janetti. Let's make that perfectly clear. Marty Kurth. Again, nothing against Marty Jannetty. I'm glad that we had him on. Marty's Marty. But yeah, if you want to be like Marty Kurth for $4.99 a month, just send me an email. Let me know that you've signed up. You can get access to the podcast a day early. You get our watch-alongs. You get our exclusive interviews. You get our live chats. You get a 5-pack of pictures from Mick. You get a handwritten letter from me. So I don't know. I think it's well worth it. People that have done it have loved it. And the more people that we have sign up to the Patreon, frankly, the more things we can do. So that's kind of where we're at. If you want to be part of it, we can keep going. $4.99 a month. Very, very reasonable.
I think we need to have a poll of our listeners. Gagne sleeper or Bockwinkel's Oriental sleeper? Which was a choke? Which was not?
The ballot box going to be rigged